Greetings and salutations! I'm Janet from World Anvil, and today we are still talking about how to world build families, tribes, fictive kin, and societies at large. If you haven't watched the first part of this video, I strongly suggest you check that out first. We're following a series of prompts in order to build our world from the smallest unit to the largest unit. So starting at the beginning will be beneficial. Well, now we've got that out of the way, it's time to light up the forge. So now we've discussed the close family unit, it's time to talk about fictive kin. And no, that does not mean imaginary friends. So, fictive kin are people who are not related by blood to a family, but who are considered officially or unofficially to have ties to them. The best example that most of you will be familiar with is godparents. Although they have different roles in different cultures, even today, godparents are assigned to a child from outside the family, but have an official recognised relationship with them. Another example of fictive kin could be fraternity brothers, or members of the same secret society. Common fictional tropes of this are blood brothers, shield wives, and courtesans. In some African societies, and some societies of the past, when children go through rites of passage, the mentor who helps them through becomes related to the family in some way. So that's another form of fictive kin. A more recent form of fictive kin that sociologists are now seeing grow up is fictive kin relations between organ donors. For example, kidney donors or bone marrow donors. Age-class fictive kin relationships are another great example. In societies you're familiar with, that might be something like everybody who graduated from a certain year of college. But again, in some tribal African societies, these are much more formalised relationships. For example, everyone who was born in the same year, or everyone who did the rite of passage in the same year. Those people become bonded not only in their own eyes, but in the eyes of the community. Fictive kin is a really interesting form of relationship which is not explored enough, in my opinion, in fictional worlds. It's a great opportunity to create something unique and different within your culture, so I challenge you to go out and try it. So guys, that brings us to prompt number 3. I really can't wait to read about this one. Make sure you write your comments below this video so we can all compare. What kinds of fictive kin do you have in your society? What roles do they play? And what benefits do they give? So let's move on to tribes or families of families. It's possible that when I said tribe, you thought of something like this. But really, the concept of tribe covers a whole host of different paradigms which are really useful for world building and social dynamics. A great example from history is the phratries of ancient Athens. At its core, the concept was that it was a super huge bloodline. A family of families, just like we said about tribes. In practice, the relationships were so watered down that they almost weren't relationships anymore. But still, it was important, because the phratries defined who in Athens was a citizen. Citizenship in ancient Athens came with a whole bunch of perks, like the ability to own things and vote. It was kind of important and very desirable. Making sure your child was in with the phratry was therefore very important. Children would be introduced once they were born, and then reintroduced at a later date into the phratry. This ensured that everybody knew their kinship, and that was the key to having the citizens' rights. You might think that that's a kind of roundabout way of doing things, but consider there weren't really municipal records at that time. Without good bookkeeping, phratries and similar tribal structures are really important for securing your identity and making sure that everyone knows who you are and you know who everyone else is. And as with the phratries of ancient Athens, being in was more than just being cool. It was your ticket to a better life. Phratries are a great example of a city-based tribe, but tribes are also really important in pastoral circumstances. The Zadruga of the Balkans is a great example of this. The Zadruga was a cluster of households, a family of families, again, if you will. There were lots of benefits to this kind of tribal system. For example, when they're moving large groups of animals, it's much easier to do that with a lot of hands. And when you arrive at your new grazing land, it's important to make sure that nobody else has got there first. And if they have, if you have more people on your side, then your outcome is probably going to be better. These groups of households often served as a kind of heavy gang to keep rival tribes off of their prime grazing land, protecting the assets of the tribe as a whole. These kinds of tribes, or families of families, are an aspect of social dynamics that isn't often considered in world building. I think that's really a shame because, again, it gives a lot of interesting aspects to the world, and there are paradigms to draw on, both from city civilizations and pastoral-based cultures. So, we're at prompt number 4. Get your notebooks ready, or open up a World Anvil page and start making notes. Remember to put your answers in the comments below so we can all share our notes. Do you have families of families or tribes in your world? What roles do they play, and what benefits do they give? Now we're going to bring back the lens one more time and talk about societies as a whole. Hopefully by now you've defined your family unit, you've thought about how families interact with each other, and what kind of fictive kin might also be involved in family groups. You've also thought about larger family structures like tribes, phratries, zadruga. Now it's time to think about society as a whole. Now obviously this is an enormous topic, but there are a few aspects that we can go through very quickly which are going to help you with your world building and to create unique and interesting societies. First, we're going to talk about castes and classes. Now, these are often mixed up and confused one with the other, but they are in fact very, very different. Castes are rigid social pigeonholes or stratas. By definition, usually, you're born into a caste. You don't get to choose. A whole bunch of different stuff might be related to your caste. For example, your name, your dialect, and your profession. Certain castes might also have different social statuses, or even different legal rights. As with all these things, some castes seem to have everything great and some castes seem to be at the bottom of the pile. There are a lot of different social models for castes from history, so if you want to read more about that, I suggest you go check out Indian castes, Japanese castes, and West African castes, all for interesting inspiration for your own world building. Classes, on the other hand, are much less rigid. Your class can change throughout your lifetime, sometimes several times. Although class is somewhat related to birth and education, it also has a lot of other factors usually, which may include wealth and profession. It's important then to consider which professions in your world are prestigious. This will be tied to certain cultural ideologies which you may have already developed. You may also have distinct groups within your societies. For example, slaves and citizens were both everyday aspects of Athenian society in the ancient world. They had completely different rights from one another and were at the opposite ends of the spectrum. As well as castes or classes, you may have other distinct pigeonholes within your society. We've already talked about the ancient Athenian citizens and how they defined who became a citizen. But ancient Athens also had slaves, and it also had people who fell somewhere in between, not slaves and not citizens. These different social categories had different social rights, different legal rights, and different associations with those identities. These are all aspects that you can work into your society as a whole. The feudal system is another paradigm that's very often used in fictional worlds. Serfs weren't exactly slaves, but they definitely weren't free either. They were bonded to the land and had an official oath with their lord, which meant that they owed them certain things. That lord, in turn, was bonded to somebody higher up in the hierarchy. He also had obligations. This went all the way up from serf at the bottom to king at the top.
In theory, I mean, there's a lot of stuff written about the feudal system, and some people think that it's fake or like a teleological invention. So, I'm not staking my name on this, but that's the model. That's the simple bit.
If you're interested in stepping away from the trope of the feudal system, check out the ancient Near Eastern kingdoms. Peasants were linked by land and water rights, but importantly, they were neither serfs nor slaves. Mycenaean Greece in the Late Bronze Age is another interesting example. Regional kings lived in palaces and had lots of slaves and workers, but there also seemed to have been local free communities, peasants and elites, who had relationships with the palace but were not enthralled to them. A much more complex relationship than the simple feudal system lays down. Another interesting paradigm to explore is the very hierarchical Incan Empire. Kings controlled large territories in a very centralised way, and households were bound very closely to the kings and the royal household. And finally, we get to social status and its tells. How do you know that somebody's rich? They're not just going to tell you. What subtle clues can you use in your world building to show instead of telling? By far the most common tell of a high social status and wealth is conspicuous consumption. Conspicuous consumption is the use of luxuries and the display of these luxuries to enhance one's own prestige and to broadcast how much wealth and surplus one has. Conspicuous consumption has taken all sorts of really interesting forms throughout history and in different places. In the 18th century, it was pineapples. Up-and-coming families might rent a pineapple for the evening to display at the centre of their table, and the really wealthy had a pineapple of their own. This craze for pineapples extended into art and architecture, and you see it cropping up in all sorts of crazy places from 18th century culture. Epicurus wrote about the fact that households would become poor and even sell all of their slaves in order to afford red mullet. That's a kind of fish, but it was so prized that people went completely crazy for it. Tapestries, books, weapons, sugar, stylized and frequently quite impractical clothing are all items which have been associated with conspicuous consumption in the past. Polygamy is another aspect of culture which is often associated with conspicuous consumption. That's why I left it until now to address. Polygamy has been allowed in an awful lot of cultures throughout history. However, examples of it actually being enacted are fairly rare, and there's a reason for this. The more wives you have, the bigger your family. A big family is expensive. Only really rich people can afford to be polygamous. And of course, as we already said about inheritance, you want to try and keep your wealth in the family. You don't want to have to divide it 12 ways in order to give something to all of your children. Polygamy is expensive. It seems odd to think about it now, but aspects of lifestyle like education and cleanliness are also social tells. In the 16th and 17th century, it was common to wear white collars and cuffs because being able to keep these clean and having enough to change while the others are being washed was a form of conspicuous consumption. You were showing off how much linen you could afford. The use of horses for pastimes or pleasurable pursuits, like polo or hunting, are another example of conspicuous consumption. Horses are really friggin' expensive. Even today, horses are expensive. Supporting them, keeping them healthy, is not just a lot of money, but also takes a lot of time. These are other ways in which people in your society might signal their wealth. Another social tell is how far is someone away from something unpleasant. This could be something as simple as having somebody else empty your chamber pot or clean your house, to living in the nice area of the city, or even having a summer place so you can escape the smell of the city in summer. And that leads on to my final point about social status, which is how healthy or well cared for are you? In 17th or 18th century Venice, plague was really common because the sanitation was super gross. When the plague struck, rich people could afford to get out of Dodge really quickly. They had money and provisions for travelling, and often they had a summer house or somewhere they could go on a different island or outside of the city-state of Venice. Poor people couldn't afford that. They just got plague. Everything from what food you eat to how well you're cared for when you're sick, your quality of life and the state and place of your home determine how well or how healthy you are. Of course, there are some exceptions. In the early modern era, people who could afford sugar were generally wealthy. They also generally had really bad tooth disease. But by and large, the wealthy tend to be the healthy. It's another great social tell. Okay guys, this is prompt number 5, that's the last one. Make sure you write your comments below this video. It's going to be so great to share all of our answers and see how we approach this differently. What roles are there within your society as a whole? Do you have slaves and citizens? Do you have a caste system or a feudal system? How do the poorest survive? And how do the wealthiest show off? Alright guys, it's time to wrap this bad boy up. Here we go. Start by considering the biology of your sapient species and what pressures the world around them exerts. Understanding the birds and the bees of your species and the basic family unit, how many people are involved, is really important for understanding your society as a whole. Think about how relatedness works, and don't forget to consider fictive kin, what roles they may play and how they integrate into the family. Then consider families of families. These can exist in city environments or in pastoral environments. Finally, consider how your society works as a whole. Do you have castes or classes? Or other forms of social strata? What social and political rights and biases apply to which groups of people? Well, after answering all of those prompts, you should have a really good idea of how your culture and society works as a whole. If you have multiple cultures that are important in your world, you can do this kind of work, go back and answer those prompts for each one. You don't have to answer all of the prompts in exhaustive detail. Choose 1 or 2 ideas or hooks, and let those influence the way your society builds from the ground up. If this video has been helpful, please do like and subscribe so that we can create more world building content for you, as well as more World Anvil tutorials. If you haven't started with World Anvil yet, go to www.worldanvil.com to get started. And if you're feeling really social dynamics, get it? Make sure you head over to our Discord server. The links for all of that will be in the description below this video. Alright guys, you know what's next? Now grab your hammer and go world build! This is part 3 of the Social Dynamics Primer, marriage / making babies. Babies. Making the babies. Others might extend to multiple kinds of distant cousins and multi-part siblings. Multi-part siblings? Sounds like they've got extra limbs or something. Which would be cool. I mean, who doesn't want a second hand? Or a third hand? Or a fifth hand? Butt monkeys. A great fictional example of this is the Vulcans, who go through a... My nose is itchy.